Okay, we are live streaming and it is recording.
Oh, hold on. Okay.
Terry stepped out.
He's coming down to your office. He's on his way. Are we live?
Yes,
Are we ready for roll call?
yes.
Okay.
No, not
Council-
yet. Pam, not yet.
Okay.
Let's give Terry a minute to get back there.
And John, just so you're aware, if you have questions or any council members have question about the Western Reserve, Brett Rodstrom is on. And if he's to speak on something, I can invite him into the speak room.
Okay. Conneaut City Council for May 26, 2020 is now in session. Roll call, please.
Council President, Mr. Arcaro,
Present.
Mr. Emery,
Here.
Mr. Gaw,
Here.
Mr. Kozeski. We lost Mr. Kozeski. Mrs. Ledford,
Here.
Mrs. McVoy,
Here.
there he is. Mr. Moiseo,
Here.
City Manager, Mr. Hockaday,
Here.
Finance Director, Mr. Williams. Law-
Here. Sorry.
That's okay. Law Director, Mr. Smith,
Here.
and Mr. Kozeski.
You're muted, Tom.
There he is. Mr. Kozeski,
Here.
thank you.
Okay, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag.
Flag.
of the States of America, to the republic
The republic for which is
and the nation under
One nation.
God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. We move on to approval of the meeting minutes for May 11th, 2020. Are there any alterations or corrections? If not, roll call, please.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gaw,
Yes.
Mr. Kozeski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Meeting minutes for May 11th have been approved. We do have an awards presentation tonight. Once again, in absentia, we have Patrolman Joe Shore from the City Police Department.
One moment. A certificate of achievement for the employee of the month. The employee for the month of May is Patrolman Joseph Shore. Patrolman Shore is a member of the Conneaut Police Department. Patrolman Shore's nominating supervisor, Chief of Police Michael Colby, stated the following: Joe is very attentive to community projects and events. Joe is very thorough with his report writing and willing to assist however he can. Joe always has the interest of the police department in mind. Signed, Council President John Arcaro and Council Member Terry Moiseo.
Okay, congratulations to Officer Shore. You know, he's done a fine job for many years and we appreciate his service.
Congratulations.
Moving on to citizen comments. Does anybody have any citizen comments?
Mr. Arcaro, just one I wanted to mention. I did get a response, an email response from a resident in Ward 2 supporting the bike lane. The person that emailed me is an avid runner and they bike frequently, and they wanted to let us know that they fully support the creation of a bike lane in the city on Broad Street, and that they would also support additional bike lanes throughout the city to encourage people to be more active while providing safer and more convenient ways to do so. So I did get a positive response, and then I did email him back what we're trying to do with that bike lane.
Very good. I did get that email also. Anybody else have any citizen comments? I did receive a comment from a resident on Keefus Road expressing his gratitude for the response and professionalism of the fire department during the incident over the bridge. So Mr. Hockaday, if you could pass that on to the fire department, Chief Lee, for the crew that responded on that day.
I certainly will.
Okay, any other citizen comments? Okay, if not, we'll move on to communications.
I have one this evening. Pardon me. It would be traffic regulation number 303, parking downtown Main Street, that there shall be a realignment of parking on Main Street between Broad Street and Washington Street to conform with the other two downtown blocks, easing traffic flow and increasing safety, dated May 26, 2020.
Okay, does council have any communications? Okay, if now we'll move on to reports of our administration, beginning with the city manager, Mr. Hockaday.
Thank you, Council President Arcaro. I'm going to do a quick screen share here and pull up my report, which is hopefully on top. And of course, it's not on top. Okay. Well, I'll just read. So a couple of different things I want to update here. We've continued to have coordinating meetings regarding COVID-19 around the county, as well as economic restart post-COVID. You know, it's kind of been a find and feel your way through it. Again, I want to thank Nichelle and all the folks over the health department trying to do the best they can to balance the public orders coming from the State House, as well as the needs of local businesses. You know, they've tried to work through and resolve issues, as well as with the fire department finding, you know, fire resistant materials that create adequate barriers in difficult to barrier spaces like restaurants. You know, I think understandably businesses are frustrated with the process. You know, and it can be difficult at times. A complicating factor is some of the things that the governor has said in a teleconference don't match exactly what comes out in the written order, and that can be confusing. So I appreciate everybody working with the health department, the fire department, and the county building department, and kind of advising some ways to come up with better solutions. You know, I would tell people, business owners specifically, if you have a question, engage in advance of it, and it helps us kind of review and make sure that whatever you intend on doing is consistent with the public health order. So appreciate that, and appreciate all our businesses working through issues. I did send at our last work session, I'd sent some updated materials on our dredge processing facility. Design continues to advance. I'll have another updated design to send out later this week. As soon as that is ready to go, I'd like to see if we can add it as an agenda item to our next work session. It's getting very close. If it's not ready to go to bid by the June 8th, I'm hoping by that final meeting in June, it will be close to ready to go. Our OPWC Chestnut and Middle paving, as you know, council authorized it to bid at our last meeting. It is out to bid. I have asked that CT add all the projects all the roads in our alternates list for 2019 into that bid package for unit pricing. Part of my concern is the Ohio State Legislature has not reauthorized or reappropriated past cycles into the next fiscal year, which starts on July 1st. We're being told that it will be addressed before they recess on June 10th. But in any event, for whatever reason, if that would not happen, then we would not be able to proceed with this element of the project, which would be Chestnut and Middle. And I wanted to make sure that we could do 2020 paving regardless of what the state legislature does. So the money's there. It would just need to be reappropriated by the state legislature. It's not new spending. It's last year's spending. So our sewer interceptor project is out for bid. Should be back by our June 8th meeting, and hopefully we have an acceptable bid and we can move to an award and construction or project phase of that. Our Lake Road Stormwater project is approximately 60% complete. We do have a maintenance of traffic plan because of the depth and the narrowness of the workspace. When they do cross Lake Road with the Lake Road Stormwater project, it will require them to momentarily shut down both lanes for that construction. I don't have a final date for that yet. We're waiting on that from the contractor. They said they would give us plenty of advance notice. So when that comes, I'll be sure to pass that along. But know that it will be required for maybe a day to close Lake Road. Right there by 1266 Lake Road. So it's in that vicinity. As you know, our ODOT Route 7 531 resurfacing project is underway. That's being managed and run by ODOT. We've had a couple questions, concerns, complaints. I'm happy to pass them all along to Jonathan Dutt, who's the managing engineer for ODOT on that project. We have 3 upcoming demolitions, 299 Cleveland, 175 15th Street, and 396 Madison. I'm expecting those to proceed in about another 2 weeks. I believe it's going to begin with the Cleveland Court property. So that's forthcoming. Those have been a long time coming. They've been on our list for a while, and we're receiving county CDBG funds for those demolitions. So excited to see those moving forward. I do want to thank the Public Works Department for the cemetery prep this year. It was kind of a wonky season running up to it with some of the weather preceding it. And then obviously it gets 90 degrees and grass starts jumping. So I think they did a great job. I think that everything looked good. And I also want to thank the firefighters for cleaning the memorial as they do every year. Looked nice. I thought it did a really nice job. And the water department, because we did not have downtown cleanup this year, they did do the mulch here around City Hall and in the short area of the downtown. As we have other rain days and stuff like that, we'll finish the balance of the downtown and get the rest of it cleaned up and spiffed up for the businesses. So it's just been a little different this year. Our water distribution crew is also working on a small, it's a 1-inch line. It serves 2 residents. It's on Middle Road. They're on a short water line replacement project currently. So that just about wraps up any of my administrative report pieces. I'm happy to answer any questions council might have.
So I did look at the cemeteries, and they did look good other than some spots for some trimming. Everything else looked pretty good. Does council have any questions or concerns for the city manager?
I just see one thing, it's, noted under planning and zoning, the final housing survey dashboard completed. Could you, touch on that, Jim?
Sure. We actually finished that in the fall, and we were waiting for kind of early spring to roll around, and we wanted to do kind of an interactive presentation with council. It's been kind of hanging on there as an item for us to go over. It would be tremendously easier if we could meet in person and do it in person and show you the data live in person. I just don't think it would come across on a Zoom conference. It's something Landbake wants to do. You know, it was supported by our Conneaut Foundation. It was supported obviously by the city and the Housing and Zoning Office last year in doing the housing survey with a number of really generous volunteers from the public that went through and actually helped us do all of this. So, and I'm leaving out the Conneaut Public Library. They were a tremendous help as well. So, you know, we kind of wanted to do the presentation for council and show you what exactly this is. We're continuing to move forward with that project into further phases that involve the land bank, the Erie Development Fund, and the Conneaut Foundation on kind of improving the housing stock and quality here in Conneaut. So we would really look forward to being able to do a presentation to show you some of the exciting things that they've been able to accomplish over the past year. I think we have to wait until we can meet publicly again.
Okay, that sounds good. Yeah, that'll be exciting to see. Thank you.
Any other questions for the city manager?
Hockaday, how are we doing on finances? Income tax, gas tax? I don't know if I should ask John or you on this one.
For specifics, I'd probably recommend John Williams to give a short report on what we're seeing in terms of income tax collections, local government fund distributions. We talk about them near daily, but I would let John give you exactly.
Thank you.
Sure. Do you have any other questions for the city manager?
There is one thing I would like. Can we get extra patrols on Woodworth Road for speeders?
I can talk to the chief about that.
Some of the culprits are the contractors that work for CN.
I was going to bring that up as well, Rick. It seems to be between 3 and 4 during the weekday. That seems to be an issue with the speeding. And then on the weekend for the holiday, there was an incident where a child was almost struck over there from some kayakers speeding up that road. So if we could maybe potentially look at getting something more consistently on the weekends when it's nicer out, that probably would be helpful.
That was the road that was paved last year, correct, Mr. Hockaday?
Yeah.
That's what happens with a paved road. Any other questions for the city manager? Okay, we'll move on to the finance director, Mr. Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Arcaro. I did email council some reports yesterday, some bank and budgetary reports. I didn't know if you had a chance to review them. There were quite a few in there. If you had any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. The only thing I really had was on the fund report. You probably noticed there were some pretty large deficits in a few funds, mainly the street maintenance fund and the Ohio Jobs 629 grant fund. The reason for that is the Parish Road project is coming to a conclusion. We had a payment of about $245,000 on that, and we just received the final pay estimate for $164,000 on the Parish Road project. So we have yet to draw the funds. We're going to draw SIB loan funds, the 629 funds, and the remaining Ohio jobs grant. So we're in the process. We're probably going to draw that money tomorrow. You'll probably see those deficits into when you get your May reports, you'll see that, because obviously we won't receive the funding in time to negate those deficits. But right now, that's what that's why you're seeing that large negative of 124,000 in the street maintenance department. Obviously, the unencumbered is much larger. That's because of all the encumbrances out there for Route 20 paving, the Parish Road project, and various other projects for the Public Works Department. But I just wanted to give you a heads up on that. And then for our next week's meeting, I'll present a tax budget schedule. It's that time of year again. We'll have to set a hearing date for the tax budget, and we'll have to go through all of the processes for that. And also, we're going to need a police and fire pension transfer in June. When we receive the July settlement, we should be okay until the end of the year. But for June, we're probably going to need a police and fire pension transfer. As far as Mr. Gau's question about some of our revenue sources, the specifically income tax, gas tax, and local government, I will provide you a detailed report after we close the month. But I can tell you right now, as I look at the numbers, as we sit today, we're down about 293,000, almost 294,000 for the year. That's about a 20% decrease. Now, Mr. Hockaday and I were just talking about this today. And for January, February, and March, we were up 3.55, 4.21, and 3.04. And then in April, because of, I think, a combination of collections and the extension of that filing deadline, we were down about 16% in April. And then in May, we're down about 20%. Now we have a few more days. We might get some more withholding to come in at this point, but right now it's about 294,000. Gas tax, we're actually up for the year in comparison to last year for gas tax, because we had that 10-cent per gallon increase. So we're at a decrease if you look at the collections that we have been collecting since the increase. But if you compare it to last year, we're actually seeing an increase in gas tax. So, and then local government, we're projecting a 20% decline in local government funds. We haven't experienced it yet, but I'm anticipating that that's going to happen. And how long and the severity of the downturn, I don't know. Hopefully it's a brief downturn and we recover quickly, but I will have a more detailed report for you in at our next council meeting.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for the finance director? Okay, if now we'll move on to the law director, Mr. Smith.
Sure. Can everyone hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. All right. First of all, we've been working on the 3 or 4 pieces of legislation before you tonight for the Western Reserve Land Conservancy. This is the acquisition of approximately 300 acres, I think, on the east side that will be turned into a conservation easement. And that should be ready for your approval tonight if you so choose. We've been working out a few kinks with some right-of-ways on the transfer of that little parcel to Key Bank, which I think we should have pretty well resolved by now. I've also been working with the Columbus office of Brecker and Eckler on the ESID, or the Energy Special Improvement District, for the improvements that will be forthcoming to, I think it's the Conneaut Human Resource Center later next month. And you should have that legislation. There'll be 3 pieces of legislation that'll look an awful lot like an assessment, but the only property that's being assessed is a property owned by the company that's receiving the improvements. And there's no out-of-pocket expense to the city. And then finally, we've been working on some civil litigation that's set for tomorrow on an injunction hearing regarding a landowner that's conducting a salvage operation in his front yard.
The only correction I'd add in there is 122 acres, Kyle.
Thank you, excuse me. It was 300, it was 315,000. And yes, that's correct.
And ESID is also known as PACE. So Energy Special Improvement District or Property Assessed Clean Energy acronyms.
Okay,
That's all I-
any questions for the law director?
Mr. Carroll, I have a question. And maybe I don't know the appropriate time to bring it up now or maybe under unfinished and old business, but I did send an email to Mr. Smith a couple of days ago, and I understand based on the timeliness of my email, you really didn't have much time to prepare. But the question I have is, Kyle, are you able to maybe just give an opinion at this point and then do a formal response to that, or what are you more comfortable with?
Let me give a more formal response.
Okay. I just wanted to ask that question, see what you're comfortable with. That's fine. That's all I have, John.
Okay, any other questions for the law director? Okay, if not, we'll move on to committee reports. Okay, hearing none. Liaison reports.
I don't have a report, but I just wanted to mention that there is going to be an upcoming meeting with the schools. We had a tentative date that was set at the prior meeting for June the 1st, but there is some conflict of scheduling. So we're working on that. Jim is working with Lori Riley with some tentative dates, and I just wanted to make you aware again that that should be coming up.
Okay, I also have a Port Authority report. Some of the highlights from their meeting when they met on the 21st, they did apply for a $7,000 wetland delineation grant or they're going to expend $7,000, excuse me, to delineate some wetlands on the sandbar and on the south end. And they're currently working with a company to determine which wetlands they want to work on. Also, the Conneaut Creek Float and Fly had their soft opening this past Saturday. And the Convention and Visitors Bureau is still working with the Port Authority on the script sign. They're trying to pin down an exact location where to locate that somewhere in the port, and also final costs. And finally, they did ask for city assistance with parking problems on Broad Street. As the area grows in popularity, there's really no regulation of parking down there. And so I did speak with the city manager on some issues. We're going to extend the double yellow line down there, and also we're going to meet with the public works director, the police chief, and the Port Authority to try and develop a plan to assist that parking situation down there. And that's all I have from the Port Authority.
I have the planning commission, and
Go
I
ahead.
asked the clerk to send minutes to the council clerk. But basically, their meeting was about the signs, the big signs for truck roll. And they're talking over and going over farm animals and the size of property that, you know, where you can put. But that was about the most of their meeting. Thank you.
Okay, any other liaison reports? Okay, if now we'll move on to our ordinances. And we have 7 ordinances tonight in first reading. So we will begin with ordinance 2920.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to grant an easement from the city of Conneaut to the city of Conneaut for the ODOT repaving project of West Main Road and declaring an emergency.
Okay, Mr. Hoffman.
This is a goofy one, so I'll explain it a little bit. It sounds somewhat circular, but the city owns property along West Main that is in the area where we're going to be doing the full depth repair next year. A portion of one of the stormwater structures protrudes out of the right of way onto the city owned property. There's nothing else there on that section of city property. But in order for us to utilize it, we have to plat it as part of the right of way. So we are essentially granting an easement from the city to the city, transferring it from just generic publicly owned property to dedicated right of way for a state route. So it's a small piece of property. And I believe there's this ordinance. I think this is the only ordinance related to this one. But it is required for this to move forward, as the stormwater structures, which are significant and very deep through that section. I think they hit a maximum depth of about 24 feet in that area. So they're rather large drainage structures. So we would need to authorize the city's grant of that property for the purpose of right of way.
Yes, very circular indeed. Right hand to left hand.
Yes.
Okay, any other questions on ordinance 2920? None, is there a motion to proceed?
Mr. Arcaro, I'll make a motion to declare ordinance 2920 an emergency.
There's a motion to declare ordinance 2920 an emergency. Is there a second?
I'll
I
second.
will second.
Second by Mr. Goff.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozewski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Mosio, the emergency has been declared.
I'd like to make a motion to waive the 3 reading rule on ordinance 2920.
Motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 29-20. Is there a second?
I
I
second.
second it.
Second by Mr. Emery.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozewski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Mosio, the rules have been suspended.
I'd like to make a motion to act on ordinance 2920.
It's a motion to act on ordinance 2920. Is there a second?
Second.
I second.
I didn't catch the second.
I second.
Second by Mr. Kozewski.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozewski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McBoy,
Yep.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Ordinance 29-20 is passed. Move on to ordinance 30-20.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to enter into an OPWC grant agreement on behalf of the city of Conneaut, Ohio, for the purpose of funding the purchase of land in the sum of $316,550 and declaring an emergency.
Okay,
Okay.
Mr. Hawkins.
There's several ordinances here, 30, 31, 32, and 33 are all related to the same project that we did in conjunction with Western Reserve Land Conservancy. This is a property that the Western Reserve purchased some years back, I want to say 5 or 6 years ago, and have attempted to find some of the use for the property on a development basis, listed actively for sale with no inquiries during that period of time. They were moving to conserve it. They had a private group that was going to accept it. They offered it to the city, so it would still be conserved, but at least it would be public, in terms of the public could walk on it. And if it met the requirements for any kind of other outdoor recreational activities, it could be acceptable for that as well. In December of 2019, the city agreed to accept the property, knowing that the Western Reserve was applying or assisting the city in applying for some of these Clean Ohio grant funds that are routed through OPWC. They were successful in assisting us in getting those Clean Ohio funds in the amount of $316,550 or final purchase price. And there are really two grants in there. There's the OPWC and the NAWCA, the NAWCA grant, and then Western Reserve is also furnishing, I believe, $17,000 of their own private donations in cash to finish this deal. All four of these ordinances are related to this project. Brett Rodstrom from the Western Reserve Land Conservancy did make himself available to this call and for council. So if you have any questions about that, I can admit him into the speaking panel if council has any specific questions they would like to ask of Mr. Rodstrom.
I think if you could just give a brief summary, would be good, so the public can hear.
So Brett, I just put you into the council meeting here. I'm going to unmute you. I'm going to ask you to start your video so we can see you.
There we are. Can you guys see me? Okay. Yes, so that is all correct. Jim summarized that very well. We have successfully achieved funding for the entire project. Our cash, a grant from NAWCA, which is the North American Wetlands Conservation Act, is the acronym that stands for, and from the Clean Ohio Green Space Program. Those funds have been awarded. They're being made available. Now we're intending to close here the next 6 weeks or so if we can. The cost of the city of Conneaut is nothing. The property will be available to be used in whatever discretion the city would like as a passive park. It's adjacent to the prison as well as the Edgefield County Metro Park property, which is called, I think, Turkey Creek Reserve, and some other Division of Wildlife property over there, which is the Conneaut Wetland, Conneaut Hemlock Wetland Swamp. So all of it will be full public access. You'll be able to do whatever you want in terms of trails and buildings and pavilions or whatever in the future. You may not do anything, that's fine too, but the restrictions will keep it as conservation property. Just one other thing to add is that 122 out of the 122 acres are wetlands, which is why we didn't get any calls from anybody from an industrial sales standpoint, which we tried for 4 or 5 years. So,
Brett, I have one other question. We're eligible for a second round in Clean Ohio funding for, say, like a trail or parking area, correct?
That's right. So improvements, public access improvements are eligible. I would recommend that you try that down the road somewhere. It doesn't have to be right now, but you certainly can. And you get one shot at that. You'll be able to achieve funding for 3/4 of whatever that value is. A lot of times you would go in for all of it in one deal instead of just doing a parking lot or a trail. I would roll that all together, but you will be eligible for that because you've already been awarded Clean Ohio funds, but you get one shot at it. That's the only thing.
Brett, this is Rick Gaw, and I didn't quite hear you in one spot. You said how much wetlands is there? How many acres?
100%. It's 122 acres of wetlands out of 122 total acres. So,
all right, thank you. I kind of figured that.
Yeah, it's just between the tracks. It's a wet spot, and there's not a lot that can be done with it anyway.
Okay.
Okay, and any other questions or discussion on this project? Okay, if not, is there a motion to proceed?
I
Mr.
make a
O'Carroll?
motion to proceed with ordinance 3020 and declaring an emergency.
Okay, there's a motion to declare ordinance 30-20 emergency. Is there a second?
I'll
Second,
second.
Second by Mr. Mosio?
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford, the emergency has been declared.
thank you. I would like to waive the 3 reading rule for ordinance 3020.
So motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 30-20. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Emery?
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford, the 3 read rule has been suspended.
I would like to make a motion for ordinance 3020 to pass.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 30-20. Is there a second?
I make a second.
Seconded by Mrs. McVoy?
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Ordinance 30-20 is passed. Move on to ordinance 31-20.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to sign the North American Wetlands Conservation Act notice of grant restrictions and declaring an emergency.
Okay, any discussion? The motion to proceed? I'll entertain a motion to proceed with his ordinance.
I'll make a motion and like to declare ordinance 3120 an emergency.
So motion to declare ordinance 31-20 an emergency. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Goff.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery, Mr. Emery,
you're muted. Go.
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski, the emergency has been declared.
Okay, I'd like to waive the 3 reading rule on ordinance 3220.
There's a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 31-20. Is there a second?
A second.
I second.
Seconded by Mr. Mosio.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I make a motion, we act on ordinance 3220,
So motion to
Excuse me.
act on ordinance,
3120.
motion to act on 31-20. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Emery.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
yes,
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Ordinance 31-20 has passed. Move on to ordinance 32-20.
An ordinance to authorize the city manager to execute a conservation easement to Western Reserve Land Conservancy and declaring it an emergency.
Any discussion? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion to proceed on ordinance 32-20.
Mr. Arcaro, I'd like to,
Go ahead, Mr. Mosey.
I'd like to make a motion to declare ordinance 3220 emergency.
So motion to declare ordinance 32-20 emergency. Is there a second?
A
I'll
second.
second.
Second by Mr. Emery.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Mosio, the emergency has been declared.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 32-20.
There's a motion to suspend the 3 reading rule on ordinance 32-20. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Mrs. McVoy.
Hold on one moment. Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Mosio, the 3 reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to make a motion to act on ordinance 32-20.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 32-20. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by Mrs. Ledford.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Okay, Mr. Mosio.
Yes.
Or correction. Ordinance 32-20 has passed. Trying to keep up. Okay, we'll move on to ordinance 33-20.
An ordinance to create Fund 320 Coastal Wetlands for the purpose of accounting for the receipt and disbursement of the Ohio Public Works Commission grant funds to acquire 122 acres of coastal wetlands.
Okay, any discussion?
The only thing I would add to that, Council President Arcaro, is we're doing a couple financial moves here. We're creating a special fund to reseed it, and then also doing an appropriation and a successive ordinance here. Even though those monies won't come directly to the city, it will go into an escrow account, and those monies would have to be memorandized and added to our capital assets for the purpose of audit. Mr. Williams could speak more to that. And then the only other thing I wanted to note is the reason why these are being done by emergency is the OPWC funds. The state of Ohio is going to be closing their books here at the end of June. We have to have everything expensed to the state of Ohio by June 12th. So thank you for moving this along. We just received this and sent it to council as soon as we could. But I did want to clarify those 2 points.
Okay, any questions or other comment on ordinance 33-28? I did not see where it's declared an emergency in the header.
That was going to be my question. I didn't see
No,
that.
it's an appropriation ordinance.
So we'll just move ahead with suspending the 3 reading rule.
So you just, yeah, just suspend the 3 reading rule and then
On
I
the
figured
next
that.
three, that's the situation for the next three.
Yes.
So I will entertain a motion to move forward with this ordinance 33-20. Anybody?
I'll make a motion to suspend the three reading rule for ordinance 3320.
Okay, there's a motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 33-20. Is there a second?
Second,
Second by Mr. Mosio.
Pardon me, Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
yes.
Okay, the three reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to make a motion to act on ordinance 3320.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 33-20. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Emery.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes,
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes,
Ordinance 33-20 is passed. Move on to ordinance 34-20.
An ordinance to create Fund 321 Land Conservancy for the purpose of accounting for the receipt and disbursement of the North American Wetlands Conservation Act grant funds to acquire 122 acres of coastal wetlands.
Okay, I think we're getting the hang of this, so I will entertain a motion to proceed with ordinance 34-20.
I motion to waive the three reading rule on ordinance 34-20.
There's a motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 34-20. Is there a second?
I'll second,
Second by Mr. Mosio.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Ledford,
yes,
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
yes.
Mr. Emery, the three reading rule has been suspended.
I motion to act on 34-20.
There's a motion to act on ordinance 34-20. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Goff.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
yes,
Mrs. Ledford,
yes,
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes,
Ordinance 34-20 is passed. And the final ordinance in this family is ordinance 35-20.
An ordinance to amend the 2020 budget as their appropriations and fund and interfund transfers attached here to and marked Exhibit A.
Mr. Williams.
This is related to the same. This just creates that appropriation. So
Oh, sorry. I was on mute. My apologies.
That's okay. I just wanted to test you to see if you were still there.
Yeah, it's just the appropriation for each of the funds. So we have, in order to memo those expenses, and we'll create revenue line items. I've already certified this with the county. And we'll have $199,550 in line item 320-925-58-100. And that is for the Coastal Wetlands Fund. And then under the Land Conservancy Fund, we'll appropriate $100,000 even into fund or line item 321-925-58-100.
Okay, very good. Any questions for Mr. Williams? Not, I'll entertain a motion to proceed on ordinance 35-20.
I'll make a motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 3520.
So motion to suspend the three reading rule on ordinance 35-20. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Mr. Goff.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Mr. Mosio, the three reading rule has been suspended.
I'd like to make a motion to act on ordinance 35-20.
So motion to act on ordinance 35-20. Is there a second?
A second.
Second by Mr. Emery.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Ordinance 35-20 is passed. Now move on to unfinished and old business. I do have one thing under old business. We talked before about the Convention and Visitors Bureau intent to erect a script sign with the city's name somewhere in the port area. Bearing in mind that we do not have the 4th of July festival this year, fireworks, due to the pandemic, I would like to make a motion that we contribute $1,500 to that project. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Mr. Kozowski.
One moment.
Take your time.
Mr.
This will be,
Arcaro,
Go ahead. Stand by a second. Yeah. Mr. Mosio, did you have?
No, I
No,
don't
I
know.
I thought I heard
Mr.
someone.
Kozowski may have
I did,
stated-
Mr. Arcaro. This would be in replacement for the what we would normally donate for the fireworks fund, correct?
Well, in speaking with Mr. Williams, it's not exactly the same amount, but since we are not going to be contributing to the fireworks, I thought that this would be a good project to contribute to.
Very good.
John, can you explain again exactly what you mean? I'm about, so this is about the signage you're talking about?
Yes, we, in my Port Authority report, the Convention and Visitors Bureau has been working to determine a place to erect a script sign with the city's name spelled out, similar to what you see in Cleveland.
Mhm.
I think Ashtabula has one too now. So they're trying to pin down a good location for that. And they haven't quite determined that yet. And they're also getting final costs in that as well, so. Somewhere in the harbor area, from what I understand, they wanted it down at the public dock, but I don't know if that's going to be feasible. So they're working with the Port Authority members to try and determine a good place for that location, to locate it.
So they were reaching out for donations to finish that project. Is that my understanding?
That's correct.
Okay. Thanks.
Any other discussion? Okay, we have a motion that's been,
yes, it was
Somebody-
seconded by Mr. Kozowski.
okay,
Mr. Arcaro,
yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Goff,
Yes.
Mr. Kozowski,
Yes.
Mrs. Ledford,
Yes.
Mrs. McVoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Okay, the motion passed. And whenever that project comes to fruition is when we'll make that contribution. So, any other unfinished or old business? Okay, if not, we'll move on to miscellaneous business.
I have something I want to mention, Mr. Arcaro.
Mr. Mozia?
With Memorial Day upon us, I wanted to make sure I made a thank you to all the current members and veterans of our armed forces, and especially to the Gold Star families out there.
Very good.
I have one, and it's a happy birthday to Mr. George Dixon. The sign says 90 years old, honk. Retired city fireman.
God bless.
Yeah. Very nice. I worked with George for many years. Tom, you did as well.
Yes, I did. So wonderful man.
Happy birthday to him. Very nice. I have one thing I'd like to say. I'd just like to thank the fire department and the police department for all the hard work they did this weekend. Living on Broad Street, I heard all the sirens all weekend long. I know they were working hard. So I just wanted to express my appreciation for all their hard work and all the hours they put in this weekend. We appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Yes,
it was a very busy weekend.
I'd like to chime in on that also. I'd like to commend the police department and the fire department. It was a tragic weekend. We had a fatal crash on the east side on Saturday night. Yesterday, the fire department responded to a working structure fire on Day Street, and they made a great stop on it. It's in an area where the homes are and the buildings are grouped very close together. And they did a good stop, especially in this heat. And that same crew last night responded to a boating accident on down in the harbor where a boat struck the break wall with the main light out there. They had multiple injuries. It was a tricky rescue for them to bring everybody in. We did have mutual aid from Asheville Township and Lake City Water Rescue. We also responded. And one of the patients had to be life flighted out of here. So I'd like to commend them. And also there was a young girl that was involved in that crash. And I spoke to the Chief Lee today, and that young girl remained calm throughout the ordeal. She's the one that called 911, stayed on the line, and they relayed the call to Assistant Chief Sanford, who spoke to her and was able to guide the boat back into it. They had trouble locating where the boat was at because of the darkness and the area of the wall where it was located. So the young girl even was had a flashlight to flash for them to signal, and was able to guide them in through that, and actually through the sound of their engine, their motor on the boat as it got closer. So she did a wonderful job, and I'd like to commend her for that also. Also, I have one other thing. It's for Councilperson Emery. Mr. Emery, I had you're the liaison with the cable TV.
Yes.
I had some complaints regarding some of the programming on there. There's something wrong where church services will start and it'll show about 15, 20 minutes of a church service, and all of a sudden it goes to news. Cuts off right in the middle of the service. Yesterday, they were showing Memorial Day services from past years, and the same thing happened. They were in the middle of speeches. They got cut off, and it would automatically go to that news feed that we have. Do you know if Mr. Galvin's aware of the problems we're having?
As of now, I don't believe he knows. We're supposed to have a meeting through Zoom, presumably sometime this month, but it was on the board to get everything situated.
Okay, just so that you're aware of that. Do you know when Mr. Galvin will be back?
I do not. I have not been informed of that.
Very good. If you can find that out and relate to the members of council, I'd appreciate it.
I could do that.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
John, I have a question. Can we have a plaque or something for this little girl that was pretty sharp? You know, honor her?
Sure, we can get the information from the fire department. I don't know if they were city residents or not. We can gather that information and then have some recognition here at
Yes,
council.
recognition.
Like we do our other people. So. Absolutely.
Yeah, I believe they were from Pittsburgh area.
Well, we could mail it to them. That's still no problem.
Correct.
Any other miscellaneous business? I just have one additional thing. I would just like to remind everybody to please fill out your census returns. It's very important to the city that those get in, and we don't want to miss out on any federal funding. A lot of things come out of the census, so please complete your census. Okay, if there's no other business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
Motion by Mr. Kozeski. Is there a second?
Second,
I didn't catch the second.
second, Mr. Moise.
Second by Mr. Mosio.
Mr. Arcaro,
Yes.
Mr. Emery,
Yes.
Mr. Gah,
Yes.
Mr. Kozeski,
Yes.
Mrs. Lightford,
Yes.
Mrs. McBoy,
Yes.
Mr. Moiseo.
Yes.
Okay, the meeting from May 26, 2020 is adjourned.